Good morning, my loves. I'm so excited for the opportunity to share another message with you this month. My name is Eleanor Schnarr, and I'm one of the preachers on the Deborah's Tree uh, message schedule. So this week, I want to share I picked the Northern Lights background because this is we're going north this week for this message. I want to read a story. I've preached about it before, but I think it's important to talk about, um, from a poem called the Skjaldskraparmal, which is in the Poetic Edda, which is a sacred text that we get from Iceland, and is where we get all of the stories of Norse mythology, which are an important place that we can draw meaning and narratives from, in the European tradition. So this is a slightly modified version of this myth from the original text, but I think it conveys the spirit of the story. And again, said the ocean, whence did this art which we call poetry derive its beginnings? The poet answered, these were the beginnings thereof. The gods had a dispute with the folk which are called the Vanir, and they appointed a peace meeting between them and established peace in this way. They each went to a vat and they spat their spittle therein. Then at parting, the gods took that peace token, and they would not let it perish, but they shaped thereof a man. This man they called Kvasir. And he was so wise that none would question him concerning anything, but that he knew the solution. He went up and down the earth to give instruction to men, and when he came upon invitation to the abode of certain dwarves, Fjalar and Galar, they called him into privy concourse with him. They killed him, letting his blood run into 2 vats and a kettle. This kettle is called Oldrudir, and the vats are called Son and Boden. They blended honey with the blood, and the outcome was that mead by the virtue of which he who drinks becomes a poet or a scholar. The dwarves reported to the Aesir that Kvasir had choked on his own shrewdness, since there was none so wise there as to be able to question his wisdom. The ocean asked, in how many ways are the terms of poetry variously phrased, or how many are the essential elements of the poetic art? To which the poet replied, these elements into which all poetry is divided are 2. The ocean asked, what 2? The poet said, metaphor and meter. That's verse 96. So I want to talk to you today about metaphor and meter and poetry. And in this story, what we see is that the function of poetry is to exist at the meeting place between 2 traditions. And the way that it does this, the way that it creates this harmony, in between what look like very, very, traditions that might be opposed to one another, but we create harmony in between these warring pantheons, through meter and metaphor. And it's interesting because meter and metaphor are 2 things that Swedenborg talks about a lot. Meter meaning tremulations, meaning vibrations, and metaphor meaning correspondences. And in a lot of ways, I think that these 2 qualities are also qualities of the mind, that there's part of us that responds to vibration, which is very often the more intuitive, um, embodied part of our minds. And there's part of us that responds to meaning. And I think this says a lot about like the left and right side of the brain and how they interact to create reality. Because really, isn't that what kind of the mind is doing, is bringing together two different pantheons, two different ways of thinking about how the universe is governed. So we have a masculine and a feminine, we have meter and metaphor. And this isn't, we can interpret this as talking as a story that's talking about religions and how religions talk to one another. And that's, probably a pretty useful interpretation, but it's still a pretty natural level in interpretation. So what I'm really interested in is how different, maybe they're not pantheons, maybe they're different loves that we get attracted to, different things that seem like they're in conflict. And maybe it's even the two sides of ourselves, the masculine and feminine inside of us, that and so this is a story about how conflict gets resolved, in society and in the individual. And it's important that, with we're talking from a Christian tradition, we're talking from the Swedenborgian tradition, but within the Swedenborgian tradition, we are able to engage all of these different pantheons, different ways of envisioning God. And that harmony, that pluralism isn't just arbitrary. It's not just saying, well, it's all okay or it's all subjective. It's actually saying that there is a way to bring things into alignment, and it's very much rooted in this tradition of Northern poetry. It's very much rooted in this idea that meter and metaphor are something that's inherently powerful, and inherently harmonizing. So I hope that this week you all are blessed with meter and metaphor, are blessed with love and wisdom. And I'll see you next month. Amen.